Okay, so we're holding Hilchos Basar Becholov, Siman Peites, the last Seif actually, Seif Daled. The last Nekuda that we reviewed in the Ramah and Seif Gimel was concerning having cooked something in a fleishike pot, in a sir besari, or the other way around, having cooked something in a milchike pot. Concerning the time frame of having to wait, we're no longer dealing with a tafshil of basar and a tafshil of chalav, or real basar or real chalav, as far as the time that one needs to wait. Here, we're talking about a pot. All it is a pot that was used to cook meat, and even that morning perhaps, but it's clean. And we cooked rice, we cooked something parve in it. And apparently, the rice is parve, supposedly. There's nothing there, except perhaps there may be some diluted tam coming out from a sir or from a k'dera ben yom, as we would call it, something that was used on that day. Obviously, there's always concerns for something that is on that day. It's part of Hilchos Basar Becholov and Hilchos Taaruvot is that one of the concepts that comes up from time to time is if the pot was ben yoma or not. So obviously it does make a difference. But when it comes to our chaka, when it comes to eating basar after chalav, chalav after basar, or even having it together perhaps, even though we know that there's certain arachakas, the Ramah is lenient, and so is the Mechaber elsewhere, that there's no problem with having your pizza, having your cheesecake, after having that rice that was cooked in that pot. You don't have to wait anything. That rice is not meat. That rice is not even a tafshil shel basar. All it was cooked in a sear, in a pot that was flavored. And the same thing would be the other way around. Of course, in that case, waiting for fleishiks after melichiks is even less of a problem. There's no problem whatsoever. The only concern, of course, is perhaps, and this is an halacha that is spoken about later, that we will see, of nat bar nat, in eating that rice together with melichiks. Eating it together is a little bit of a different issue, because that brings up the machlokes of the various shitas of nat bar nat, which stands for noten tam bar noten tam, which basically says that this tam is not original anymore. It's a nat bar nat. It's a descendant of the original nat. It's a second or perhaps even a third flavor, generation of the flavor. So the tam, according to everyone, has been diluted by the way it came out. In other words, the fact that I'm making rice now in this pot, there's no original tam there, for sure not. Everybody agrees that there's no original tam. The tam, whatever tam is entering this rice, even though it's still there in the walls of the kelim, it's not the same as if it would actually be being cooked in the pot at the same time.
I have a problem with how you explain. Let me explain why I have a problem.
All right.
Maybe
Sure.
Comment on it.
Okay.
The pot.
Correct.
When it exits pot, let's
Sure.
say tom of meat.
Okay.
The pot was everything.
Yes.
If what I have in the pot now is milk, that tom, the pot,
Right.
will cause a basar b'chalav problem within the pot if it's milk.
Right.
Now, if it's the exact same tom that is hitting the wall of the pot, if I'm cooking rice in that pot as well.
Right.
So it's the fact that it's exiting the pot, the walls of the pot, is not what it's making diluted such that it has no longer an effect.
That's correct.
Once it was absorbed in the rice, now if it exits the rice into milk, let's say I take that rice
Right.
and put it into a different pot with milk, now it's been diluted.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you have a good point that apparently, if you take it step by step, and you introduce milk versus rice into that pot, then what you're actually having is a tam basar of sorts going directly into the chalav. And therefore, one second. Therefore, why should that be any different if it's rice and not milk? That there's a tam basar going into it.
So because the rice is not milk,
right.
so that's not a problem. The
No.
basar is going into the rice.
Right.
It's not a problem.
Exactly.
But it's
So-
not enough barnap yet.
Yeah, no. It still is. But it still is. But when it comes to isura, isur,
That's something else.
nevelis and treifas,
That's something else.
or when it comes to basar and chalav, combining forces, combining their time, even on a lower level, lower scale. It is chemically, it's not the same. Chemically, it's not the same. No, it was on a lower scale. We have introduced the concept of not bar not later on. We will talk about it.
Oh, okay, so let's later.
No. When we get to it, not bar not is something that is a chiddush. I mean, in a sense, it's a chiddush. It's not a big chiddush. It makes sense too that a tam can be diluted. It can. Things, in various ways to dilute a tam. There's a machloket on what dilutes the tam. There are shittas that hold that just by the fact that it went into a pot and came out, that's not bar not. So you would be right. According to the shitta that is strict, it requires 3. It requires it for going into the pot, going into water, and from the water going into the rice.
I think the difference is there are those who that when the and goes through and then from the water into the pot, by the time it arrives at the walls of the pot, it was already once diluted by going through the water, and therefore what's now absorbed in the walls of the pot is no longer...
Because that liquid is already fleshik and liquid just as much as the meat.
But it's only fleshik as much as tam is king.
Right.
But it's been twice removed from its source, let's say.
Right.
But the others hold that even when the meat in the pot, even if you... First of all, there are those who hold that the water cannot be called a knot.
Right,
okay. Tam, because it has no tam of its own. So therefore it's only, like you said, it's only meat by now.
Yes.
Because it has no tam of its
own.
And there are others who hold that, regardless of that, if the meat is in the pot, it'll probably have to the pot somewhere.
Right.
So it doesn't help that there's water, because not all the taste that was absorbed by the walls of the pot will have gone through the water.
Right. But anyway, that's the subject that we will eventually cover.
Okay.
For now, all we need to know is that in dealing with Basar b'chalav, which each one is mutter on its own, it's hetera. It's only when they are combined that they present a problem. We're not machmir. We're not going to be so machmir. As it is, it's a derabanan to eat them in a way if they're not cooked. As it is, right? We just of course separate them. We wait a certain amount of time. So if all you have here is not the real thing, you don't have the real basar, you don't have the real chalav or whatever, all you have it is a tam balua in the kli that is eventually going to come into the rice. Can I put yogurt on top of that rice? Yes. There shouldn't be any problem.
Once the rice is out of the pot.
There is even a shita that holds, once the rice is out of the pot, there's a shita, even a whole tafshil, mechaber. Tafshil of basar, you had tafshil of basar, you didn't have the basar, you had a tafshil of basar, right? That was cooked, it was actually cooked in basar. So it's real fleshy. You can have a tafshil of chalav now, just make sure you wash your hands, you rinse your mouth if necessary, depending how you hold. So the harchaka of 6 hours is only meat and milk. So we went down level. We went down from the real basar and chalav. We went down to tafshil, which the Ramah is makbid. We're all makbid today, by the way. Tafshil. We don't have a chocolate bar after we had a fleishikas soup, even though there's no meat anymore in the soup. It was chicken soup. There was chicken there once upon a time. We're not going to have a chocolate bar after that. Nobody will. Wait 6 hours. You're going to hold yourself, right? So here we went down. The Ramah says, even though I told you we're machmir, but by the way, in this case, I'll grant you that you don't have to wait. And that was the question that the Shach raised in the Ramah. What's the big chiddush here? Later on, we with not bar not, you can, according to some, you can even have it at the same time. You tell me you can have it afterwards? You can even have it at the same time if it's not bar not, even together. Yeah, even though the Ramah is makbid over there. So that's what the Ber Heitev says. Ber Heitev basically says on this, there's various tirutzim on the Shach. The Ber Heitev says, wait a minute, the Shach is machmir there, like the Shitas Arivon. That not every case is a not bar not, that you can have it together. So over here he says, even if it's in the worst case scenario, it's not a real, in other words, we would have to be ordinarily machmir. Here, as far as how much do you have to wait, you don't have to worry about that. If it was only cooked in a fleshik pot, you don't have to wait at all. So that was basically the Ramah in Seif Gimel.
Which means that you don't necessarily...
We're going to get to that today. Yeah, that's a little bit of the shir today. All right. Now, I had a question myself last week that I wasn't sure about 100%, and I found pretty much the answer. And that was, we spoke about tafshilim, tafshil shel basar, and then tafshil shel gvina, how the mechaber is not, according to the mechaber at least, there's no problem. Netila b'neim says, eno ela reshus. But if you want to actually have the real cheese after the tafshil, or basar atzmo achar tafshil shel gvina, then for sure you have to wash your hands. If you're going to have the real basar, or the real gvina, one after another, then you should wash your hands. Okay.
Even if you use fork?
Yes, you may have touched anyway. Good question. Today we use cutlery. And by the way, I looked it up too. It's like I thought. Most cutlery use on a regular basis began in Europe. Knife, fork, spoon, as a set to be used in eating a meal in the past few hundred years. It was not customary. The fork appeared here and there, but to have the actual whole set, it began in Europe.
I know where the source was.
Yeah, you can look it up anyway.
I'll email it.
No, you can look it up. I checked that. Yeah, I also checked it. Look at all of it. Read the whole thing. The fork itself as a utensil was around for a long time. There was different kinds of forks that could be used to make things easier. But to actually have your meal, sit down, to have a spoon for your soup, a fork, a knife, and to actually eat most of those foods with the cutlery, that's only a couple hundred years, and it's European. Yeah, it's not Middle East. It's not Middle East.
I'll highlight the place.
It's not Middle East. It's not Africa. It's not Latin America. I'm talking about when it started, which is in the Middle Ages, a few hundred years ago, altogether. Yeah, before that, some people just grabbed with their food, with the bread, the food. They may have had a fork for certain things, or they may have had a spoon for the liquids, but not that the table was set with all the cutlery for every little thing. With a knife, for this, and it's funny today, you have a fish fork, and you have a chicken fork, and you have one like this, and you better know which side of the plate to put it. Whenever I sometimes intentionally at home I move things around. My wife says, "No, that's not the way it goes." I says, "Why not?" Who says? Let's do the way we want to.
Oh, you're a rebel.
Anyway, yes.
There are actually style has a name.
There are several styles, right? Okay, so let's go on. So I had a question about what happens if you had basar, and right after the basar you had tafshil shel gevino, because that did not appear to be that's something that somebody brought up or mentioned. What would the halacha be? In other words, what would their opinions be? We had tafshil shel basar, then tafshil shel gevina. We had gevina, and then tafshil shel basar. We had the tafshil shel basar, and then real gevina. We had the various combinations that would require at least, at the very least, natila. But what would be the deal if you had real basar, steak, and now all you want to have is a tafshil shel gevina? You're not having the cheese. You're having something that was cooked with dairy. There's no dairy there right now, but it was cooked with dairy. So I saw that the Sefer Badei HaShulchan does actually does mention it, and he wants to prove from Sefer Chochmas Adam that you would actually have to wait 6 hours. Of course, talking about this, even the Shitas who are Mekel, he says you would want to wait 6 hours. And he's medaying this from the Pri Megadim that says also, the Pri Megadim is machmer, that if you had meat and you cut a radish with a Melicha knife, you cannot have that radish for 6 hours. We're not machmer like that, I believe. I think I saw various chuvas that we're not machmer, even if it's a davar chorif, to wait the 6 hours just because it was cut with a knife. Yes, it's true that something that's cut with a knife, there's duchka de sakina, something that's sharp, and here you have the combination of a knife and something that's sharp, that it's machmer, it takes out more of the tam into the tznon. Still, we're not machmer to wait. But the Pri Megadim says yes. So the Badei HaShulchan says, based on the Pri Megadim, you can be medayik. If he makes you wait, if he requires you to wait 6 hours, even between a tznon that was cut with a fleshik knife, the more so, if you had real meat, you would have to wait 6 hours for the tafshil or challah. Okay. The Knesset HaGedolah seems to be saying that in this case, the one that I had a question about, where you had basar and then a tafshil, you wouldn't have to wait at all. It would be enough bikinuach, be'adochel, rinse your mouth, clean it, wash your hands, and that would be sufficient. Because again, you don't have basar and challah. All you have one of them is basar, but the other one is a tafshil, then it would be okay. Alright. Either way, today we're machmir between tafshil shel basar and tafshil shel challah. I think just about everybody's machmir. We wait 6 hours. Yeah. And obviously, even if you wouldn't wait, at some point you may have to rinse your hands. You have to wash your mouth. Okay, the next halacha, the last seif, is a very interesting seif in Siman Peites. It appears to be very simple, but there's quite a few diyunim here, various discussions here. It talks about the placemat on the one hand, and it talks about leftover bread. So maybe let's read it inside, and then we'll go through the issues. Sif Dalet says like this: Misha achal gvina, whoever ate cheese, verotze lechol basar, and he wants to eat meat. So before he eats meat at that table, tzarich levaer me'al hashulchan, he has to clean up the table, clean it up from any shiyure pat, from any leftover bread, shachlu im agvina, that one may have eaten with the cheese. That's halacha number 1. Halacha number 2. Asur le'echol gvina al mapa shachlu b'basar. You cannot eat cheese or dairy food on the same placemat, on the same tablecloth that you just ate meat. The other way around. You just ate Melicha, you can't eat on that meat. Halacha number 3. V'chol sheken shasur lachtoch gvina afilu tzonenet. And the more so that you cannot cut a cheese, yellow cheese or whatever, even if it's cold, b'sakin sheregilin lachtoch basar, with the same knife that you usually use to cut meat. Not only that, lo od afilu apat shochlim im agvina, even bread that you eat with cheese, the bread. Asur lachtoch b'sakin shechochlim, you shouldn't cut that bread, that challah, whatever, with the same knife that you cut meat. V'chen lehefach, now same thing the other way around is also asur. Mihu, however, al yedei ne'itza bekarka. Oh, completely new halacha here, completely new concept that not everybody is aware of, that exists. However, if you are able to stick that knife in the ground, hard ground, shari, that's mutter. Nevertheless, אבל כבר נהגו כל ישראל, all of Am Yisrael, Sfardim, Ashkenazim, and Temanim, everybody, להיות להם שני סכינים, to have 2 sets of dishes, fleishiks and melichiks. Well, what if they're the same color? We have that different colors today. In those days, לרשום אחד מהם שיהיה לו היכר. They would make something on it. They would draw or write or I don't know, do something to it that there should be a heker to know which one is flesh and which is melicha. And usually the custom was to write or to color code or to do something to the melicha one, not to the fleshik one. All right. Ve'en leshanot minek shel Yisrael. Don't change this minek. However, the Marshal says that the right way to go is to have 3. Melichiks, fleishiks, and parva. What most people do today, I don't know about most, but a lot of people do, is they have melichiks and fleishiks, but knives, they have for parva. Knives. Because some things are parva, for knives. But you don't necessarily have to have forks and spoons for parva. Because if you're going to be using it on a dishes, it's going to be one of the dishes. You're going to use the spoon for that dish, right? You're making yourself a cup of coffee. Well, it's going to be a dairy cup, dairy mug. You're going to use spoons. If you're going to use spoons, it's going to be dairy spoons. Now, if you're going to have a cup of tea, by the way, you can have any of the one. You can have your fleishike mug. You can have your dairy mug. You can have a glass, which is neither really. If you can have a tea, even though you're having that tea with your fleishike meal, or with your dairy, it's okay. You can have any kind. Obviously, you don't want to have a real melicha cup when you're eating meat, even though you're having a tea, right? You're having a fleishike meal. What's a melicha cup doing there? But if it's not a melicha cup, it's a glass that you don't usually use. Usually, you don't use it. You don't use it for coffee, right? You can have it for meat, or you can have it for dairy. You're having tea, no problem. So therefore, some say you should be careful not to use glass for both. But it's not, glass is less of a problem than the mugs. But even if you did, you're not actually having it together. If you're having a tea, the tea is parva. Even though you're having it with a fleishike meal, the cup is clean, you're having a tea. What's the big deal? You're going to have you use that cup, that mug in the morning for coffee? So that's the case of the Ramah. It's a not by not situation. It's not a problem. You can have it together at the same time with your meat. I don't recommend it if the mug is a real milchik cup that's used all the time for milk. But if it's occasionally used for a coffee, but most of the time it's used for cold drinks, it's used for water, juices, then it's okay. But again, it's better not to. It's better, everybody has today mugs and cups that are fleishiks, mugs and cups that are melichiks, and your occasional glass that is usually parv. Okay? So that's basically the Seif Dalet. Now we're going to go through every point that we just covered. As far as the halacha of leftover bread, as you know, some people have bread with every meal. Okay? Bread is eaten with the hands. Hands can be sticky, with shamnunis, with fats, with grease of meat, or grease of cheese as well. And because of that, the halacha is very clear. You're going to continue to have bread. That's very nice, very good. But you can't have the same bread you just have in the dairy meal. Why? Because there could be some shamnunis stuck to it. That's all. So tzarich lebaer, remove all the shiurei pashachlu magvina. Okay, that's very simple. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein Zecher Tzaddik Lebracha has a tshuva on this, on bread, on loaves of bread. Okay, people eat. He says what the halacha here really indicates that slices of bread may be a problem. We have sliced bread. We slice the bread, and we eat slices. And those slices, or half a slice, whatever is left over, may have something stuck to them. You don't want to have it together. Because the whole idea is to avoid having basar v'chalav together. Right? That's the whole idea. Therefore, this may have something stuck to it. Leftover bread from the last meal, dairy meal, or flesh meal, don't have it with the opposite meal. But what about the loaf that is intact? Well, not intact anymore, but is, half or 3/4. Nobody touched that with their hands. Why can't you? You should be able to put that back on the table and slice from that loaf, of course, now using a fleishik knife or using another knife, whatever meal you're having now, and continue to have from that loaf of bread. That should not be a problem, he says. He says, nevertheless, mitzvah, he says, mitzvah min mufchar, he says, to be machmer, not to have it at the other meal. You just had it with a dairy meal, don't put it at your fleishik. You had it with a fresh meal, don't put it now at your dinner. You've had this bread, this loaf, even though you didn't touch it, it's better just to leave it away. Leave it off the table. But you understand, in other words, the halacha that the mechaber here is talking about, that one should remove leftover bread, is really the slices. That's because that's where the concern is. That's all. All right. Then we have the din of placemats and
Before you go there.
Sure.
Otherwise, will that end, or you're afraid they touched anywhere?
No, you could. He says there's no problem with the loaf, the leftover loaf, because people are not careful with the slices. They just touch it. But people are somewhat careful with the loaf. They're not going to touch it with their bare hands. But it could happen. But usually it's not a problem. The problem is more with the slices of bread. So he says you're better off if you can. It's not to say that you cannot slice yourself and use. You still have a whole half a loaf. You want to have some bread, then it shouldn't be a problem. Yeah. It's just that people are not careful with the slices as much, and with that you want to get removed out of the table. All right. The next din is that seif was about the tablecloths and placemats. Many people today, Baruch Hashem, we have different tablecloths, different placemats. We are clean. Today, life is a little different, and as you're going to see soon, for good reason, we do some things differently. The main idea behind the mapot, behind tablecloth, is because of the same concern: leftovers. It's dirty. So the Radvaz, I think Pesach Tshuva brings it down over here also, was once asked, we don't have different tablecloths, he says. He asked him, we don't have that minute to have a different. All we do is flip it over. The Radvaz says, that's good enough too. You have one tablecloth, flipping it over on the other side when you're having meat instead of dairy would be sufficient. But I think the Ravaz also says that in our days, in other words, in his days, they began to use. Look at this. He began to use in his time ke'arot on the table, to actually bowls. Everybody got their bowl. Also, bowls, plates. We began to use ke'arot on the table, that we don't serve the food directly on the table. We are actually putting plates. Everybody gets his plate, his soup bowl, the whole thing. He said that it began to take place then, maybe a little bit before, right? If that's the case, you're never putting food directly on the table. Think about it. Most of the time, most of the food that we serve at the table is in a bowl, whether it's a salad, whether it's meat, potatoes, rice. For sure, you can't just put it on the table. I mean, it has to be in a container, depending on the food. But this would be, even cheese is in a plate. You don't just put the cheese on the table. Even desserts, chocolates, fruits, we don't put on the table. I mean, technically you can, but we don't do it, he says. And because we don't do it, so he says you have two things here, basically. You have and apparently it's understood from his words that he does require both. You still have to flip over the tablecloth, it's the same one, and you have the advantage of having ke'arot, of having plates, of having bowls on the table, so the food is never touching the table. So you don't really have a problem. Even if you were to eat on the same table, it's not such an issue. Because lechatchila, we said you should not eat on the same tablecloth. Okay, that I understand. But what if I have the same tablecloth and I didn't turn it over and all I have is plates? So only the Bach I saw so far. There could be others too. The Bach is very machmir. We saw it in Taaruvot. If you recall, the Bach was the one that was machmir by klisheni, that it's mavliya or maflit. And the Bach had the concern, apparently that's the explanation of why the Bach says plates are not enough. You can't put a plate, he says, on top of a fleishika plate on the Melicha table without separating. Because when you eventually put a Melicha plate, hot, we're talking about hot, on that same table, it made the tam, even though it's a klipa only, a little bit of a klipa may enter the plate, may enter the bowl. You'll notice some people are careful also on countertops. The same countertop, not to put, it's a chomro, you don't have to be machmir. On a countertop, a plate of soup is only a klisheni. And we paskin a klisheni is not mavliya or maflit. Okay? So putting it down there, the following day putting another hot plate of milchiks on the same countertop is really not a problem. For chametz, also not, even though everybody makes a big deal about chametz. Oh, but you've used it to place chametz a whole year. Yeah, but what kind of chametz did you put on it? Did you put a hot loaf of bread directly on the counter? I mean, what was it? Obviously, because chametz is more chamer, because chametz we're more careful, and we take extra precautions, then we of course clean it and rinse it and make hagala on the countertops too, certain countertops that is, that are bolea, that may have had suffix, blias, even though they may have had blias. You know what it will take to extract those blias out again? Okay. So you don't really need a gala, you can just cover them. Cover your countertops if you have a countertop that absorbs, that is porous. Cover them with something. You don't really have to go through the bother of making a gala. Yes, but you should either clean it very, very well. If you have granite, it's less of a problem. Just clean it very, very well with hot and soapy water. That should be enough. Something is stuck there, something is still there. But to be concerned that it's going to, all the blias are going to come out, it's very remote. So for some things that are porous, we're machmer for Pesach, but a whole year round, you don't have to be machmer. Should you do it lechatchila? Well, if you have formica, I don't think it's a good idea to put anything hot on formica. In general, you're going to burn it, right? Stone, I mean, it's a klisheni. So if it's in a hot pot, then it's very, very hot. You may want to be careful on the surface you put it down. But usually it's not a problem. The only problem is if spilled over. Yes, that's what we're careful not to put it on the countertop. It may spill over, then you may put something there that's milichiks. You want to make sure it's clean. That may be more of a chashash, spills. But to actually be bolea or maflit from that hard surface, no, we're not machmer like the Bach is. But that's the Bach's concern over here, and that is why for him it would not be sufficient, the fact that we just have bowls on the table.
So under what circumstances are we saying
that we don't really have to be machmir like the Bach, that you can put a bowl of hot soup on the same counter too.
So that wasn't on the fire?
Yeah, it's a cliche.
So what we're putting on the countertop already is a cliche?
Yes. Sure. Usually, yeah. Very rarely do we put actual pot on the counter.
I'm saying, I was just wondering which we're...
Yeah, with a pot, is a kli rishon is more of a chashash.
But if it spills also from the kli, should it be a problem? If it
No,
spills from a kli
also
sheni?
not. Also not.
So the only time we would have a problem is if we put a kli on there.
A kli rishon may be a problem. Maybe a
Especially
problem.
if it spills.
Yes. Yes, that's correct. So that's good to clarify that, because if people do put a pot, if that ever happens, put pots of a kli rishon, then that would be another reason why you want to eventually clean that up for Pesach or for whatever. Or don't do it to begin with because you don't want to have that problem. Yes. So thank you, Ilan, for clarifying that.
So if you put a kli rishon on, what is absorbed in the walls of the kli will go into the countertop.
It may.
Well,
not necessarily.
Why not?
I'll tell you why. We hold...
From kli to question.
Oh, you see? Very good. You remember that.
Yeah, because it's hard.
We
It's
hold...
like food.
Yeah, we hold that tam does not go from kli to another kli. Unless there's roitev in between them.
Roitev in between.
Right. Unless there's liquid in between. That's exactly it. And that's why we
Besides
don't...
that, we have here also, agav, the case of tatagavar. The countertop.
That's also... Right, okay. So we're careful. We are careful with these things, obviously. And especially that the surface should be clean. But we're not here machmir so much that if you are using bowls, kli sheni, and, it's not such a big deal anyway. We could be making as long as you have a separate tablecloth.
Why don't we say tatagavar by us?
You can say additional svaras. You can say additional svaras. Yeah. Bli ezanat mefapea. That's how we pass them. Bli ezanat mefapea. They don't travel from keli to keli without roitev in between. Well, you have two kelim. For it to go from one to one without roitev. We don't.
That could be roitev.
Yeah, right. Okay. Now this seif comes from the sugya, the makor.
When you say roitev, does it have to be actual? Would it be already a problem if it's just?
No, it has to be liquid.
Real liquid.
It has a real liquid, yes. The makor of this halacha, or part of this halacha, is in the sugya and chulin of Zayin and Beis, I think. There's a mission over there of somebody wants to go to a picnic and he wants to take meat, cheese with him. He wants to travel. He's allowed to be tzoirer. He's allowed to package the meat and the cheese in one mitpachat, in one cloth that will envelop both of them, as long as, of course, they're not touching each other. So the Gemara says, what's the big deal if they're touching? We're talking about cold stuff anyway, cold food anyway. So the Gemara, Abaye says there that, true, since they're cold, we may not need a klipa because they're cold, but we would need hadacha. You would need to wash. They touched each other, so therefore you don't want to have basar and gvina touch each other even though they're cold. Okay, so that's where this comes from. Therefore, because of that, the halacha here states that if you are using the same mapa, which is like a mitpachas, and it was the same tablecloth or placemats, there's always a chashash that they may come to touch, and you may come to eat them together. That's all. It's understood, by the way, from the poskim. I saw various poskim that say that you are allowed to wash that tablecloth. There's no problem. It's not that you have to make hagala to it. You can wash it, rinse it well, and you reuse it. That's what he meant, is you shouldn't use the exact same one, only because of that chashash. There may be leftover spills. You may come to eat it together. If it's clean, go ahead and use it. Reuse it.
Once you wash it, you can use it.
Right. Today, if you use placemats, you have a yellow one for meat, maybe. Yeah. In theory, yes.
In theory, once it gets washed,
yeah,
you put it in
no
the
problem.
next. No problem.
Yeah, it shouldn't be any problem.
What is and you talked about Ravaz with individual. Maybe we have different colors.
Right.
I don't know what they had today.
Right.
If you had different colored the placemat or the tablecloth.
To enable what?
At the same time.
No, that we can't. Remember, we don't want to have them at the same time at the table. Even two people. Remember, we discussed that a lot of two people eating fleishiks and miliks at the same time on the same table. Presents a little bit of a problem, and we have to have some marchaka for that too. We have to opposite ends of the table, something in between them, something that they don't use it together. So there should be a heker, or they shouldn't come to mix. All right. Now, from the Gemara and Chulin later on, Kuf Yud Aleph from the base, there's various additional halachas that are learned legabe the use of a knife. Now, some of these halachas we're going to learn in Siman Tzadik Vav. So I'm not going to go into all of them, and it doesn't pay to go into all of them because it has to do with using a knife to cut things that are sharp, vegetables, bread. It understood from that Gemara that discusses the effect of a sakin, of a knife, being used on various foods, that those foods have a different effect on the knife. Some foods are sweet, some foods are hot or sharp, and they tend to draw out tam. And that, of course, would make a difference on if I could use that onion. As you know, you can't use that onion that you use the flesh knife. Because of these halachas, because of these concerns, that duchka de sakina, as it is called, the application of force, duchka de sakina, applying the force of the sakin, does something, especially in conjunction with certain foods that are hot or sharp. So, now, why am I telling you this? Because there are variations or various halachas or various possibilities on what happens if you did use a knife from fleischiks with Melicha stuff, or the other way around, Melicha knife with fleishik stuff, or if you cut a vegetable in between, okay? If you cut a vegetable in between the two times that you cut the meat and the dairy. Anyway, so there's various halachas. The only halacha that concerns us right now is bread. Can you use the same knife? Can you use a fleishik knife to cut bread that you're going to eat with milchiks? Can you use a Melicha knife, dairy knife, to cut bread that you're going to eat with? That's the Rashba says no. With knives sometimes there's shamnunis and there's fat and you shouldn't do it. Rabbeinu Shimshon says it's always okay if you clean it, because Rabbeinu Shimshon says it's an issue of not bar not. Using a knife, he says you're always dealing with not bar not, coming in, coming out, and therefore he says when you're cutting the bread, you don't have to be concerned. Now, that's just I just gave you a little bit of background information. Here, the Mechaber says something very interesting. The Mechaber says that the more, not only are we careful with placemats, you can't even use a knife that was used to cut cheese, even if it's cold. You can't even use a knife that was used to cut meat, to cut cheese, even though it's cold. And even bread. Oh, even bread that you're going to eat with cheese, you can't cut with a knife? What? So why not? What's the big deal? Obviously, he's not going like a Rabbeinu Shimshon. Obviously, he's not paskening like Rabbeinu Shimshon. He's paskening like the Shittas who say that lechatchila, these are all lechatchila dinim, you should not do that. So we have to understand a little bit what is this din of sakin, and especially what the Ramah introduces, a very completely revolutionary concept. It appears to be very interesting, but it's not so revolutionary, is that the sakin of all the utensils in the house has a very special way of being machsher, to make it kosher. Ne'itza bekarka. So that's what we need to understand right now. Stick it in the ground 10 times. What's this all about? Where is this all taken from? Okay. Just for your information, the Siman that deals with Hagala, Libun, Hechsher of Kelim is in Yore Deah Chelek Beis Siman Kuf Chof Aleph. And it would pay to review that Siman to understand what's going on over here. Because without going to that Siman, you don't have the complete picture. Even if you look at the Noise קיהן and the Tazen Shad, and you look at the Gemara of where this Ne'isa Bekarka comes from, we don't really understand what's going on. But I'll tell you briefly what's going on here. There's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, actually the last daf, towards the Ein Vav on the base, that teaches us a new halacha, a new din, that somebody borrowed a knife of a goy and wanted to use it. He wanted to use it for dover tzoinin, however. He wanted, obviously, to use it for something cold. He wanted to cut an esrog, as the Gemara says there. Fruit salad. So it's enough to cleanse it with a rag, make sure it's clean. That's one pshat in shofin oisa. There's two pshat in what the word shofin means. Some say shofin really means lashchiz. Lashchiz in English is what? No, lashchiz, when you want to sand something and you want to scrape lashchiz, you know, a shchita knife, a shchita knife, yes, when you sharpen it, you stone, so that's called lashchiz. In some ways it's called lashchiz. In other words, you want to sharpen it, but you're basically scraping off any layer that's there. Exactly, like the window paper, exactly. So like sandpaper, that's called lashchiz. Okay, anyway, so in order to be able to cut this fruit, all you need is to clean up the knife, to make sure that it's clean. But you also need to make ne'itza bekarka kasha, 10 times stick it into hard ground. Hard ground means ground that's not soft, that has not been used, for planting. Hard ground, 10 different places. 10 places. If you look at Tosfos, brings down, I think, the Yerushalmi there, 10 times lav davka. There is a nusach that says 3 times is okay too. But we're machmir. We do 10 times. Okay. So there's something called ne'itza bekarka kosher 10 times. And what's this for? Remember, this is only for tzonyan. So I have to make this point very strong, because if you go through the sugya or this halacha, it's not so evident, it's not apparent what are the circumstances. We're only talking about cold foods. If you ever buy a sakin from a goy and you intend to use it permanently, you always have to make libun. In other words, you always have to make it kosher 100%, even if you only plan to use it for tzonyan. Because that's how we hold. Even though libun is necessary, if you plan to use it for hot food, you plan to use something for hot food, you need libun. Or you need hagola, depending on the keli, right? The halacha is, even if you plan to use something only for tzonyan, and lechora, it would not require to go so far as making hagola and libun, the halacha is, even if you plan to use it for tzonyan, and you plan to use it permanently, something that was strafed before, you give it the biggest hechsher possible. It was libun, in a knife. Ne'itza bakarka, therefore, is not a heter on a permanent basis, really, especially not for hot foods. Ne'itza bekarka may be a solution for cold foods. If you know for sure that you're going to use it only for cold foods, then it's possible. Why are we machmir over here? Why were we machmir? Okay, some are more machmir here in Basar בחלב than by the case of the Gemara, because in my Basar בחלב they say you may forget to do the ne'itza. In other words, it may not be enough. When you get to that there's a difference between the Gemara's case of buying it borrowing it from a goy and using it on a permanent basis, because the Marshal says that the whole idea of ne'itza was they were only matered b'mikre. You had a need right now. You had a need, but to do it on a permanent basis, he says, I think that they would not allow for it. Why by the Gemara? Yes, the Gemara was not Basar בחלב. Basar בחלב were more makpid, that you shouldn't come to mix it up. All right. Now, this I'll just tell you a little bit of a little din that we spoke about it before, that is relevant today. You go to a fish market, great deal, $2.59 a pound for salmon. It's cheap, no? Atlantic salmon. Okay, and you see the scales. Remember, you have to see the scales on fish. You can't buy fillet. Even if he tells you, I swear to you, the guy tells you, this is salmon. Don't you see it's red? No. The halacha is very clear about that. No exceptions. You have to see the scales, even if it's 3 scales left, part of the skin and the scales, it's okay. You cannot buy fillet fish even if the guy tells you this is kosher fish, salmon. Okay, so you see the fish, you see the scales, you want to buy it, you tell the guy, can you clean it up for me? It'll be my honor to do it for you. How do you want it? Sliced? The problem is he's going to use his knives that he uses squid for the crab and for the oysters. I don't know if these knives for oysters, but he's going to use it for all the treif stuff he used it for. What now? Can he do it? Huh? Yes. If all he's doing is cutting the head and the tail, the edges, then all you got to do is either rinse the edges, or like some are machmir, is cut a little bit of a slice from where his knife touched the fish. And it's mutter. Why? Because it's cold. There's nothing hot here. It's cold fish. Elamai, we're machmir a little bit because of duchka, the sakina. The sakin is sharp. It cuts. The pressure of the knife may emit some of the flavor that could be in there. Could be. And even then, it absorbed through cold processes. But the only thing is you have to be careful that his knife should be clean. Now, in Europe, a lot of our mothers used to go to the marketplace with their own knife in the basket. Here, use my knife to cut the fish. Now, that's, of course, better. But if you go, today if you go with your knife to the marketplace, they'll stop you. Yeah. But you understand, it's cold. The cold is not really an issue. If anything, you cut the edges, or you rinse it at least. At the very least, you rinse the edges where his knife. So here, he's telling us the lechatchila din by tzoinen. This is a lechatchila din by tzoinen, except for the marshal. That by tzoinen you can use ne'itza bekarka. This method of kashering a knife works with cold foods.
Apropos, when you said cutting the fish, what is something that's spicy or sharp?
Yeah, that's in Siman Tzadik Vav.
So
yeah, Siman Tzadik Vav.
To be certain that it's just
I'm saying.
Like in a restaurant, it might be a problem.
Right. In the Siman Tzadik Vav, we'll see how sharp food makes a difference. According to some, it can make a difference that if that sakin is not ben yoimo, now it is ben yoimo. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It awakens. According to some, it can make a difference. But
another one from the Pilgrim's program.
Yeah.
Into the carcass.
Yeah.
10 times. Does it have to stay in, or you put it in and take it out?
No, you just put it in, take it out, put it in, take it
Does it
out.
have to be like outside ground? Could you use it for a flower pot?
It's just karka kosher, so flower pot doesn't qualify for that.
Okay.
It has to be deground. Yeah, flower pot has already ground that has been me'ubad.
Well, no.
Yeah.
So it has to actually be in the backyard or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Now, how kasha does it have to be? How
hard just means that you stick it out, it's not soft earth, that's all. That's not soft earth.
And leave it inside for a year?
No. The sakin should not have any gumois. How do you say gumois, in other words? Where the shanunis could be stuck, like grooves of sorts. It would have to be just a clean, sharp knife. And if you do that for davar tzoinen, it would be enough. And that's what the Ramah basically says over here. Now, again, going back to what we said before, if you permanently buy a knife from a goy like that to permanently use it on a regular basis, you're going to make the proper hechsher for it. You're not just going to eat some bekarka all the time. Even though technically you can, if you were to only use it for tzoinen. You can go from basar to chalav, from chalav to basar. That's what it says here. Yeah. There's a halacha that some are makbid not to use the same pot for basar one day, and the next day make hagala to it and use it for there. You may forget. Which one is it now? Fleishiks or melechiks? Erev Pesach, when you make hagala anywhere from chametz to kosher Pesach, you may do so. It used to be fleishik a whole year. Now I need it for Pesach. I don't have a pot for melechiks for Pesach. Instead of going by one, go ahead and transform it to a melicha pot by making the proper hagala. That you can do. But I think the Chasam Sofer basically says, even though some say you can change, don't do it. You may lose track of which one it is right now. If you only had one keli, you're stuck in the boon. What do they call it? The boondocks. Yeah. You can do. That's what you would do. You would make hagala, right? You can. Now, so that's as far as hagala. Erev Pesach you can do it because again it's once a year. But a sakin from basar to chalav, from chalav to basar, you would be able to do it if it's tzoinen. Alidei ne'itza bekarka, sticking it in the ground. Sorry. Again, it's an important halacha. Once you plan to permanently use a knife for things that are not tzoinen, obviously you want to make the proper hechsher. It's only by tzoinen that you have this type of ne'itza bekarka possible. So even if you were to borrow it from a goy, and you could do it, if you were to buy it from him, and eventually want to use it for everything, you need to actually make the proper hechsher. Otherwise, ne'itza can work for davar tzoinen.
Once you've made the proper kasha,
Yeah.
bought it.
Yeah.
Only use it for cold.
Right.
Can you keep back and forth?
Yes. Yeah. That's what it says over here, that you would be able to, except that our minhag today is to have separate knives, separate sets of cutlery for both. As the Ramah finishes up, right? To have two sets of knives. But otherwise, you would be able to. In other words, you make sure it's clean, it's only tzoinen, needs a bekarka kosher is mutter. Because what are we doing here? All we're doing is taking a fleishike knife, right, and cutting with it something cold. Now, remember, what the Mechaber said is that you can't use it. He didn't talk about ne'itza. Can't cut, even if it's cold, you can't cut it. You can't take a knife from your drawer, the fleishik, and cut a piece of cheese with it. It's a fleishik knife. That's the lechatila din. But the Ramah says, miu alidei ne'itza bekarka kosher shori. Okay? Which everybody agrees with, basically. I mean, it would be, almost everybody, it would be mutter. So the Mechaber was only telling us the din that you can't do the lechatila, but without that's without ne'itza. So ne'itza works with tzoinen. Okay? You buy it from a guy, and you plan to use it bichlal on a permanent basis, then you would want to make the kosher completely, even if you only use it for tzayin. All right. Now, so what's going on over here? It's mashma from some rishonim that ne'itza helps also to remove blias from inside the sakin. That's what apparently from Rabbeinu Shimshon it's understood as well, that's what the ne'itza accomplishes. That the ne'itza removes any blia that the sakin through the duchka the sakino might emit. Therefore, we have a very important machlokes between the Taz and Shach on this last Ramah. The Taz holds like Rabbeinu Shimshon that ne'itza does accomplish quite a bit, and as far as the shamnunis, any shamnunis that may be there on the knife, it's enough to just be mekaneach. Therefore, he adds that even though we don't pass like Rabbeinu Shimshon as far as the duchka de sakina that is maflit betzoinen. In other words, that's what Rabbeinu Shimshon holds, that the duchka de sakina is maflit betzoinen. He holds, the Taz holds, since we don't pass like that, you're allowed to actually take a knife and a fleishik knife and cut the bread to eat with cheese. Not because of nat bar nat, because we don't hold like Rabbeinu Shimshon, he says. It's not for that. It's because there's no plit at all. And therefore, the Taz holds that if you're going to cut bread, if you're going to cut cheese, no, one more time. If you're going to cut bread to eat with cheese, obviously, bread, all you need is to clean it. He says all you're doing is cutting bread, clean that knife, make sure it's clean, go ahead and cut that bread, you can have a slice of that parva bread, of course, with cheese. Shach says, no way. Ne'itza is not just for the belia, it's also for the shamnunis. The reason why you need ne'itza, the Meforshim explain, by a sakin at all, because of the shimush todir. That knife was not used once and it has fats that you can remove with a cloth. It's been used so many times, and that is why ne'itza is a solution of it. Not only a solution, a requirement there from the goy. Why don't you just take the knife and just rinse it? No, because there's so much shamnunis, he's been using it with meat, he's been using it with a lot of stuff. Even though now it's a cold application, yes, but it's shimush tmidi all the time. It's not enough. You need ne'itza. So the Shach basically says, since that's the whole idea, it's not to remove the plita inside. It's because there's so much shamnunis, then even if all I want to do is cut bread, I need ne'itza. So the Shach says, even if all I'm doing is cutting bread, I'm going to need ne'itza. And the Taz says, if all you're doing is cutting bread, kinuach is enough. You're eating cheese, you want to slice cheese with that fleishik knife? Don't do it, unless you do ne'itza. So the Taz basically says, when do you need ne'itza? You're going to cut the cheese directly with that fleishik knife. You want to do that? You have no other knife? You have no other choice? Go ahead. Go to your backyard, do some ne'itza, right? Then cut your cheese. All you want is cut the bread? You don't need ne'itza, you need kinuach. The Shach says, no, I need ne'itza even for bread. Even though there are some poskim who say that the Shach will agree with the Taz. Yeah, I saw that too. It's not, it's not necessarily by bread. He was only concerned. Where was he? Let me see. No, I'm sorry. That was something else. The Shach, let me continue on. We'll see that the Shach says something else. The Taz therefore says that it's okay to cut the bread with a fleishike knife. All you need is kinuach. You don't need the Ne'itza. Shach disagrees and says that for bread you also need Ne'itza. The Taz allows us to cut the cheese with Ne'itza. The Shach says Ne'itza is only for bread. That's what it was. The Shach would also, on this there's a machlokes. The Shach says no, Ne'itza was only for bread. And some say the Shach would agree that Ne'itza is also good enough for cheese. Okay, so that's what the machlokes is. Some say the Shach says Ne'itza is only good for bread but not for cheese. And some say that Ne'itza is also good for cheese. And all he was arguing about is that on bread, kinuach is not enough. So either the Shach says you need Ne'itza all the time, or the Shach says, like some understood, that Ne'itza is only good for bread. You cannot use even Ne'itza if you want to use that knife for cheese. So that's a big machlokes here. The Taz says you can. Again, it happens. You have nothing else. Can you use it? By the way, can you take that fleishike knife right now and smear some butter on your bread? What's the difference? Well, butter is soft. Cheese is hard. Some say it's okay. If you don't have another knife, and you want to smear some soft cheese, some butter on your bread, part of bread, right? Whatever. The Mechaber just said don't do it with cheese. He didn't say it with butter. He didn't say it with soft cheese. So there are some who are matir. B'derech hakrai. In other words, you don't have anything else. You need something. You just grab it. Can you just softly use that fleishike knife? Again, we don't do it usually. We just don't do it. No one needs it.
You take it out of the drawer and just after it's been, of course, washed.
Yeah, just make sure it's clean.
But things like that. I always think someone who's going to do that, he has to really off his mind.
Yeah.
If just one time daydreaming.
No, right.
And who knows what happened.
Right. So you understand? So that's the basic machlokes Shach and Taz on this Ramah on what's Ne'itza is good for. Is it good for only bread? And Taz says, for bread I don't even need Ne'itza. We don't pass it Rabbi Shimshon, so we have no concern here, or even not benat. It's not intended necessarily to take out the bliya. Just the shanunis will go away with kinuach. Just clean it up very, very well. I need Ne'itza for the cheese. For the cheese, it's an extra chumrah. We need it for the cheese. You have the ducha, the sakina. You have,
But the shaykhar.
Right. Eventually, we'll see that ducha, the sakina. I mean, it's just yeah. So the Shach says no. Ne'itza is necessary by lechem, and by gvina. Either he says you can't even do it, or according to some, he would agree that you can do it with Ne'itza. I mean, that's the Ramah said you would be able to do it. Sorry, except that the minig is different.
It's interesting. First he says, Niddah kavanato, the Tifia Minhag Asulana.
Yeah.
Niddah kavanato. So he's explaining the kavanah of the Ramah. Don't know what the Shach is holding. Right? Then at the end it says, Mikol makom, Nechol polechem le'echol gvina, bazeh shapir yesh lanu lismoch amma shemekantfot chila.
Yeah, exactly.
So then he says, yesh lismoch, so he's already giving his advice. Yeah. Once he says yesh lismoch, he's giving his opinion.
Right. Okay,
changes between.
Let's finish up with it. The Taz also writes that the Gabid, what Ramah wrote, that there is a minhag to have separate knives and separate dishes, basar b'chalav, and therefore not to use kinuach and ne'itza. That's only the Gabid cheese, using meat for cheese or cheese for meat. The Taz says this minhag is not necessarily for bread. For bread, he says, lechatchila, there's no minhag, he says. You are allowed to cut any bread, part of bread, with any knife you want. As long as it's kinuach, as long as it's clean. You don't need the Ne'itza for that. The Shach says on this too, no. What the Ramah meant, the minhag, is also for bread. For everything, he says. The minhag to have separate dishes is also for bread, not just for gvina. Okay, what's the din if by mistake b'di'evet somebody used a fleishike knife and he cut cheese, or the other way around? We're talking about something, of course, that was cold, something that was clean. It's mutter. Some would require ne'itza, of course, for the sakin now, especially if you're not sure if that sakin was clean or not. The sakin may. So that's when you would use ne'itza. In other words, by mistake, it was used by mistake. You went ahead again. Remember, a sakin has duchka de sakina. And it's unique that Ne'itza Bekarka can help for that you don't have to make Hagala right now. As long as it was used for, by mistake of course, was B'tzoinen. Here we've learned the halachas of lechatchila. How could you do lechatchila? The Mechaber says you can't. You can't. Even for bread you can't, if it's a fleishik knife. Right? The Mechaber says you shouldn't. Right? But if you actually do ne'itza, you kinuach and all that, then it's okay. But these are all in lechatchila. What happens if b'di'evet you used the fleishik for the cheese, for the fleishik, then it's cold. If it's cold, it's mutter. There was even a shaila that was brought up to one of the Rishonim or Achronim, or whether a goya by mistake used a fleishik knife to cut hot cheese of a goy. It was a goyish cheese, it was hot, and he says the knife is mutter, because the cheese was not yatzoledes boy. And if it was not yatzoledes boy, then it wasn't hot enough to be mavliya. So of course, you don't do it lechatchila. You don't even do lechatchila by tzoinen. But was there any problem with it? No. The sake did not become treif. So here too, if anything, if you made a mistake and you used the wrong one for the hard cheese or something like that, or dairy for a hard piece of meat, if anything, you would make ne'itza bekarka, if anything, because it may be a little bit dirty, but l'chor you wouldn't need anything. But as far as the meat, as far as the cheese, we're talking about cold food, you don't need anything. You rinse it out, as we said before with the fish, you clean the edges, right? It's not a problem. We're talking about cold. It's cold, nothing hot over here. There's no real blia, there's no real plita over here. Elamai, you're cutting it. We'll talk eventually about dover charev, which is a little bit different. Vegetables, it's a little bit different. Onions and radishes, what happens with that? That you cut with a fleishik knife. That day you put it into the cholent. Or I'm saying a dairy knife and you put that onion, that could be a problem. Remember, I didn't want to mix you up too much. Sharp dover charev changes the circumstances a little bit. But just the sakin by itself, we see that there's actually either a permanent or a temporary solution on how to switch from one to the other, even from basar to gvina, right?
Ever have to make how this is good enough?
Not if it's with cold.
No.
Yeah. Once you start using something on a permanent basis, it's not. You want to switch, it's different. I mean, after all, if you're buying something that may have been used for hot and you want to use it even for cold, but you eventually plan to use it all the time, then you want to do the right hagala or liba, whatever is applicable. But if it happens, or you need to switch, a sakin special method of hechsher is kinuach and itza bekarka. The custom is not to use this method because ordinarily we have separate sets. But should it happen, or b'di'evet if you did cut, that should be sufficient. You may not even need it if it's cold. But if it's not clean enough and whatever, or you want to do it lechatchila and you don't have another set, then this is the proper way of kashering the knife, even if it's from a goy. Okay? Not only fleishim, because it's tzoinen. Clean it up well, make sure it's clean, wash, then stick it in the ground, and then you can use it for that time. And you want to use it on a permanent basis, then even if you plan to use it only for tzoinen, you should make lieben for. Yes?
But that's also, you have to be careful with things of the knife. Sometimes they can also be a little...
Obviously. And the edges, yeah.
How about
Yom is always helpful, but in here it's not necessary. Yeah.
No, I'm saying on the sekin.
Yeah.
But doesn't. So only
with mamashas it wouldn't help, right? And anyway, if you buy it from the go, you would need tvila also, besides the hagola, or in this case the libun.
No, that's for different.
Okay, Mitzvah Shem will continue next Tuesday with Siman Tzadik.